returned to Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity, and Ezra led this second group. They were given permission to return to Jerusalem, and they were also given a generous budget from King Artaxerxes. The budget was to cover expenses for the trip and also provide offerings to God once the group arrived. An earlier group of returning exiles rebuilt the altar and the temple, but their devotion to God had waned in the intervening years. They weren't keeping up the required sacrifices and offerings in the temple, so now the focus of this second group is more of a spiritual restoration rather than the building or physical restoration of the first group. Ezra mustered the group that was going to return. They went a few days' journey from Babylon, we think, near something called the Ahava Canal. We don't know exactly where that is, but it appears as one of these canals that feeds into the Euphrates River. And at that base camp that Ezra established, he took a census of the returning exiles. 12 clans were identified, and the number of men from each clan was listed. The total came to 1,500 men. So if we add in a projection for women and children, probably we're looking at 5,000 to 6,000 people, maybe a little more, that are on this journey, this caravan that's going to head from Babylon back to Jerusalem. Well, after he took the census, Ezra quickly realized there weren't any Levites present, and they would be necessary to have proper temple worship. So he sent out a group to go and find some Levites and persuade them to join the journey. And they were successful in this. They found some Levites and brought them in. And Ezra said that it was successful because the hand of God was upon them. And we also learned that Ezra called on the people to fast and pray for the journey ahead. They wanted a safe journey, but they also prayed for a right journey, one that would be pleasing to God. We saw again that phrase, the good hand of our God was on us. That's been a recurring theme here in Ezra. God answered their prayers for the journey. And so here are the main themes that we took away from last week. First of all, we said that the people displayed a humble dependence on God. And we saw that through the time of fasting and prayer that they put on and called out to God for protection. Remember, Ezra was afraid to go or ashamed to go and ask the king for protection because he had talked to the king about how powerful God was. So he didn't want God's name to suffer in the king's eyes. We saw the people humbled themselves before God, and God lifted them up. And then secondly, we saw that Ezra displayed integrity. He refused to ask for the king's soldiers, preferring to rely on God's favorable hand. Ezra was not concerned about his reputation, but he did not want to see God's reputation suffer loss in the eyes of the king. And then thirdly, we saw that God answers prayer. God's faithful. He heard and answered the prayers of his people. Well, tonight we'll see that there's one more pre-departure event that takes place, and then the exiles are off to Jerusalem. So let's take a look. We're going to read Ezra 8, 24 to 36. And I'll go ahead and read that. And again, if you want to jot down any key words to serve as our overview for the night, do that, and we'll list them. Ezra 8:24. Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their kinsmen with them. And I weighed out to them the silver and the gold and the vessels, the offering for the house of our God, that the king and his counselors and his lords and all Israel there present had offered. I weighed out into their hand 650 talents of silver, and silver vessels worth 200 talents, and 10 talents of gold, 20 bowls of gold worth 1,000 derricks, and 2 vessels of fine, bright bronze, as precious as gold. And I said to them, you are holy to Yahweh, and the vessels are holy, and the silver and the gold are a free will offering to Yahweh, the God of your fathers. Guard them and keep them until you weigh them before the chief priests and the Levites and the heads of fathers' houses in Israel at Jerusalem, within the chambers of the house of Yahweh. So the priests and the Levites took over the weight of the silver and the gold and the vessels to bring them to Jerusalem, to the house of our God. Then we departed from the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. The hand of our God was on us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and from ambushes by the way. We came to Jerusalem, and there we remained 3 days. On the 4th day, within the house of our God, the silver and the gold and the vessels were weighed into the hands of Meremoth the priest, son of Uriah, and with him was Eleazar, the son of Phinehas. And with them were the Levites, Jozabad the son of Jeshua, and Noadiah the son of Binnui. The whole was counted and weighed, and the weight of everything was recorded. At that time, those who had come from captivity, the returned exiles, offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and as a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to Yahweh. They also delivered the king's commissions to the king's satraps and to the governors of the province beyond the river, and they aided the people and the house of God. Okay, so what are important words here in these verses?
Offering, house of God. Silver and gold and vessels.
Oh, vessels, yeah.
Everything was recorded.
Yeah.
I made it twice, once kneeling and once.
Yeah.
The hand of our God.
Yep, again, yep, hand of our God. Okay, great. Ezra told the exiles to assemble a base camp by the Ahava Canal. He took a census and found there were no Levites present. He sent for the Levites and then had everyone fast and pray. There was one more task that needed to happen before the group departed for Jerusalem. Ezra ordered a counting of the gold and silver they were carrying to Jerusalem. He appointed leading priests to be responsible for all these offerings. Sherebiah and Heshabiah were named in the previous chapter as leading priests that were found by the team that was sent to Casaphia to locate the Levites. Now here in chapter 8, these two men and 10 of their kinsmen were put in charge of safeguarding the gold and silver. That made a total of 12 priests who were responsible for the treasure. That was one for each tribe of Israel. Again, even after dispersion, exile, and now return, God is still thinking about all of Israel, all 12 tribes. Well, Ezra orders that gold and silver and vessels be brought forward. These were offerings for the house of God. Note that these offerings were collected from the king, his counselors, and his lords. The offerings also came from the people of Israel. So there were some that stayed behind in Babylon or in Persia, and they contributed to some of these goods that were being carried back to be offered once they got back to the temple. Well, it tells us here that all of the exiles were present to witness what was about to occur, this counting. So Ezra wanted complete transparency, and he wanted accountability. So everyone that was leaving on the journey saw the count of the gold and the silver take place. They saw it be entrusted to these 12 priests. Well, at that time, weighing on a scale was the primary way of counting gold and silver. The units of measurement recorded here are unfamiliar to us. As we said in an earlier lesson, it's difficult to translate the amounts listed into modern day values, but we'll take a couple of ways of looking at this. First, it talks about having a talent. Well, a talent is a weight of measure. A talent is about 75 pounds. So it says there are 650 talents of silver in verse 26. That's nearly 25 tons of silver. At the current spot price of silver, that's worth over $45 million. A talent of silver also represented about 20 years of work for a common laborer. So another way that we might value this amount of silver that they're carrying is that it could purchase the labor of 650 workers for 20 years. The 12 priests were also responsible for silver vessels, which were worth an additional 200 talents. And there were 100 talents of gold weighed out. Well, gold was much more precious and valuable than silver. Some have estimated the gold could be worth 13 times as much as silver by weight. So 100 gold talents would then be worth as much as the 650 talents of silver. There were additional gold bowls worth 1,000 derricks. And so again, at today's gold price, this is well over $1 million. The derrick was also the monthly salary of a soldier, so you can use that as a way to estimate the value too. You've seen this all adding up. It's really quite a fortune that they're carrying with them. Well, it says there were also 2 bronze vessels, but there's no weight given for them, but it says that they were as valuable as gold. The Irish Bible scholar Adam Clark believed that this was a combination of various metals that when polished would retain a shine as bright as gold. And he had actually witnessed this in his travels. The individual ingredients were of little value, but when they were combined in the right way, they had great value. It took great artistry to put them together in the right way. The result was more durable than gold. And so that kind of fits the description of what we have here in this passage. Well, Ezra gave the priests a charge in verse 28. He didn't have them sign for the gold and silver. He didn't ask them to make a pledge or take an oath. He simply told them that they were holy to the Lord, and the gold and silver were holy to the Lord. Here, Ezra harkens back to the words God gave Moses regarding the priests in Leviticus 21:6 and 22:1-3.
They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God. For they offer the Lord's food, offerings of the bread of their God. Therefore they shall be holy. 22. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, so that they abstain from the holy things of the people of Israel, which they dedicate to me, so that they do not profane my holy name. I am the Lord. Say to them, if anyone of all your offspring throughout the generations approaches the holy things that the people of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he has uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord.
So when Ezra says that they're holy to the Lord, it's kind of hearkening back to the instructions given to Moses when the priesthood was first established, that they were to be set apart for service to the Lord. And he's reminding them of that here. Well, we don't know exactly what the scales were like. Here's a wall painting from Egypt, a little earlier time, but maybe they had something like this. You've often seen smaller scales, and it's hard to imagine that they would use a small scale for this quantity of silver and gold. So maybe they had something more akin to this. Some of these scales could handle, a couple of talents at a time. But you can still imagine, to weigh all of this must have taken the better part of a day. It went on for a long time to weigh and record this great amount of silver and gold and vessels that they were carrying back with them. Well, verse 28 also points out to us, it points us to what the prophet Isaiah wrote in chapter 52. And I think we'll benefit from a brief detour to go take a look at Isaiah 52. So if you can flip over there now, we'll take a look at this well-known passage, and we'll see how it applies here to Ezra 8, and we'll come back to Ezra 8 in a minute. So first, let's go over to Isaiah 52. When we read these passages, Isaiah 52, 53, and even 54, we clearly see the prophecies concerning the first coming of the Messiah, and Jesus fulfilled these prophecies. We see God's servant is lifted up and suffers. He's pierced for our transgressions. He's crushed for our iniquities. There are a few phrases here, and maybe even more in chapter 54, that are pointing to his second coming when Christ returns to earth. But there's something we don't give as much attention to in this passage, and it relates to what we're studying in Ezra. So for a moment, we'll kind of take off our 21st century Christian hat and put on our 5th century BC Ezra and Exiles hat and take a look at this. The first 12 verses of Isaiah 52 speak to the coming salvation that God will bring. This prophecy has more than one fulfillment. We typically think of the return of Messiah to the holy city, but these verses had an earlier fulfillment. It was a message of hope for the captives in Babylon. God would bring salvation or deliverance for his people out of captivity. So let's kind of read through these first few verses here. So first, Isaiah 52, verses 1 and 2.
Awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion, put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city, for there shall no more come into you the uncircumcised and the unclean. Shake yourself from the dust and arise. Be seated, O Jerusalem, loose the bonds from your neck, O captive daughter of Zion.
So there's a call here to the captive daughter of Zion to awake. She's to shake off the dust, put on beautiful garments, and arise. God put forth this call to those in captivity in Babylon. And I'd suggest that maybe the call went out to other dispersed Jews that were dispersed by the Assyrian Empire. We don't know for sure, but there are some indications that maybe there were some of those that returned as well. We do know that some of those clans get referred to later on, so they're not really lost tribes, as they're sometimes referred to. God knows where they are. But this call may include some of them. And Isaiah recorded this call to Israel 150 years before the time of Ezra. So God will again call his people to awaken in the day of the Lord. But the first fulfillment of this is here in the time of Ezra, as the people are called to arise, put on beautiful garments, and come out of captivity. Well, then, let's read verses 3 through 6.
For thus says the Lord, you are sold for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. And thus says the Lord God, my people went down at the first into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them for nothing. Now therefore, what have I here, declares the Lord? Seeing that my people are taken away for nothing, their rulers wail, declares the Lord, and continually all day my name is despised. Therefore, my people shall know my name. Therefore, in that day they shall know that it is I who speak. Here am I.
So here again, we've got a dual fulfillment, one that is future. Christ will return, and his people will know his name. But first, he remembered that they sojourned in Egypt. They were oppressed by the Assyrians. And then verse 3 points out to their captivity, and it says they were sold for nothing, and they would be redeemed for nothing. So Babylon conquered Jerusalem, carried away the captives. They didn't pay a price for that. They were captured for nothing. And then also God moved in the heart of Cyrus to allow them to return freely. So they paid nothing to be returned. And then verses 7 through 10.
How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice together, they sing their joy, for eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of God.
Here again, there are two parts in this fulfillment, one yet future. But here, these verses contain a joyful announcement to the captives. There's good news of salvation and that God reigns. He was returning to Jerusalem, and he's going to liberate his people. That'll happen in the future, but this applies to them too. There'll be joy and singing. And we saw that at the dedication of the rebuilt temple and the Passover celebration that followed, there was much joy and praising. And we'll remember that in Ezra 6, 19 to 22.
On the 14th day of the first month, the returned exiles kept the Passover, for the priests and the Levites purified themselves together, all the who were clean. So they slaughtered the Passover lamb for the returned exiles, for their fellow priests, and for themselves. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also by everyone who had joined them and separated himself from the uncleanness of the people of the land who worshiped the Lord, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had made them joyful and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, so that he aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel.
So we saw that when they came back, the temple was rebuilt, they celebrated Passover, so there was much celebrating and joy, as Isaiah describes here. And then we'll wrap this up, Isaiah 52, verses 11 and 12.
Depart, depart, go out from there. Touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her. Purify yourselves, you who bear the vessels of the Lord. For you shall not go out in haste. You shall not go in flight. For the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your near guard.
So these verses are going to bring us back to where we were in our passage in Ezra. Those who bear the vessels of the Lord are to purify themselves. And Ezra told them that they were holy, that they were set apart. He told them that the gold and the silver was holy to the Lord also. The command goes out to depart, but Isaiah says here, it will not be in haste. And in fact, when the Jews left Babylon, they didn't leave suddenly, as the Israelites did when they left Egypt. You'll remember there, it was a rush. They had that night of Passover, and they were gone in a hurry, and God told them to be prepared to leave quickly. Not the case this time around. So here, coming out of Babylon, the Jews don't flee. They had time to plan for the journey, to organize, to gather provisions. And unlike the Exodus from Egypt, there would be no pillars before them and behind the people to lead them. But here, Yahweh would go before them, and he would be their rear guard, as Isaiah prophesied. So we see that Isaiah passage that we know so well and love and can't understand why our Jewish friends can't see how that points to Christ, there's also this earlier piece to it too, in Ezra's time, that was fulfilled as well. Well, so back in Ezra 8, verse 28, Ezra told the priests they were holy, and the valuable cargo they guarded was a freewill offering to Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Bible scholar James Corman commented, "It is always of the greatest importance that God's servants should take the greatest precautions in handling sacred contributions, that their actions should exhibit to all men the utmost honesty and integrity." Well, Paul spoke of this idea also in 2 Corinthians 8, 20 and 21.
We take this course so that no one shall blame us about this generous gift that is being administered to us, for we aim at what is honorable not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man.
In verse 29, Ezra makes clear that there will be a reckoning when they reach the end of the journey in Jerusalem. The gold and the silver will be weighed again at the temple in Jerusalem, with the chief priests, the Levites, and the heads of fathers' households present to bear witness to the count. The priests were to keep the gold, silver, and vessels separate so they were not stolen, embezzled, or intermingled with other articles. They were designated to be given to God when they reached the temple. Ezra also demonstrated that he is a wise leader. He enlisted trusted men to guard the gold and silver. Counting the items before leaving and then again upon arrival was not due to a lack of confidence in the priests. It was a sign of Ezra's wisdom and good judgment, good stewardship. Verse 30 says that the chief priests and the Levites took possession of the silver, the gold, and the vessels with the intent to deliver them safely to Jerusalem. Now, just a kind of a quick note here, a minor detail, but I'll point it out briefly. Back in verse 24, the ESV indicates that there were 12 leaders. There was Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 kinsmen. Now, the original text isn't really that clear about what that means, and they've kind of chosen the punctuation there, but the verse may also mean that there were priests that were selected in addition to Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and their 10 kinsmen. So there may have been a total of 24 guardians. So again, a minor point, but that's, I think, kind of why we have the mention of the Levites in addition to the priests here in this verse. Well, let's pause for a second and consider some of these things that we've read so far. And let me put out this question here. So as we try to bring some of this lesson forward into today's time and consider our situation here, what treasures has God entrusted to us on our journey, and how do we guard them?
I mean, would you say tangible and intangibles? I think intangible treasures are actually more important than tangible treasures. Tangible treasures are things like you think they're valuable to handle. Like the intangible are the ones that are actually more like where you can't put a real value. Like you say, wisdom is a treasure, right? You would say that is more of a treasure than like $1 million or whatever. So you would say, but you have to find treasures as either both or what is actually real treasure.
Yeah, so I left it open on purpose, yeah. We have all those kinds of treasures, don't we?
Tells us the future through him, right? And it's through him and knowing him. He lays it right there out in front of us. Like the prescription. And that's an amazing treasure. I mean, there's so many deceivers in this world. To see it written and recounted in so many different ways is comforting. And it's an extraordinary treasure.
Yeah, well.
2 Timothy 1:13-14. Follow the pattern of the sound words that you have heard from me in the faith and love that are in Christ Jesus. By the Holy Spirit who dwells within us, guard the good deposit entrusted to you. I think in the context of the good deposit entrusted to us, the Word of God, and that we are to be faithful. Actually, I should have said the verse before, I'm not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. Follow the pattern of the sound words you've heard from me, and then guard again the entrusted to me. So we have the Word of God. It's kind of to your point, and that's where we have that.
That's a better.
Yeah, but we have God's sure word, and we've been entrusted to it, so we got to hold it faithfully, not veer from it, not twist it, faithfully pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, there are certainly people that want to twist it for their own gain. Yeah.
God's given us each gifts to use. And do we guard them and do we use them correctly?
Yeah. Well, we're finally ready to go. We've had a lot of preamble here, a lot of preliminaries, and now we're ready to go. And so just a reminder, here's one possible location for the Ahava Canal. We saw this map earlier, and you'll see down there kind of toward the lower right is Babylon, the larger dot there. And then just north and west of that a little bit is a potential location for the Ahava Canal. Again, we don't know exactly, but that's one possibility. And then if you see that kind of dotted line, that's probably the path that they followed. That was one of the most common paths to get from Babylon to Jerusalem. They wouldn't go straight across because that was just desert, and they couldn't survive that journey. So they went up and around. It made it a longer journey, probably close to 900 miles, but they head up to Haran and then down through Aleppo and Damascus and then eventually down into Jerusalem. In verse 31, all the preparations were completed and the exiles departed. It says it was the 12th day of the first month. In Ezra 7:9, we saw that Ezra began to go up to Babylonia on the first day of the first month. So we don't know exactly what the timeline looked like here. It could be that the journey to Ahava took 8 or 9 days. They for 3 days, left on the 12th day, or maybe the 12 days began when they reached Ahava. We're not sure. The order of events may have been a little different, but what the text is describing is that many things occurred in those 12 days. They traveled to Ahava. They counted the people. They discovered there were no Levites. They sent out a party to locate Levites and persuade them to join the journey. And those Levites left their homes and packed up and did camping period. They fasted and prayed. They counted out the gold and silver and assigned men to guard the treasure. So all that happened within that 12-day period. It's just amazing what was done in that short period of time. Once again, Ezra credits God with the success of the journey. The hand of our God was on us. Here was the answer to their fasting and prayer at Ahava. There was no military escort, but God delivered them from the hand of the enemy and from ambushes. Now, this is not to suggest that there were no attacks at all. I think to the contrary, the exiles encountered many attacks on their 900-mile trek. At that time, there were many bands of highwaymen who attacked travelers on the road. In fact, some historians suggest that there were certain tribes whose sole source of income was what they stole from travelers. So it's no little thing that God protected these exiles and their treasure all the way to Jerusalem. They arrive at Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month, and we read this earlier when Ezra gave his recap, so Ezra 7:9 tells us that. Is that,
I'll read it. 5 Timothy.
Okay, for on the first day of the first month you began to go up from Babylonia, and the first day of the 5th month you came to Jerusalem for the giving of his God.
so that tells us we have a 4-month journey left on the first day of the first month. They arrive on the first day of the 5th month. And upon arrival, it says they remained there for 3 days. So this period allowed them to rest up from their long journey, to reflect on what God had done for them, and then to make plans for what would follow. Nehemiah does the same thing some 20 years later when he makes his initial trip to Jerusalem. We read about that in Nehemiah 2:11.
I'll read it.
Okay.
So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode.
So that seems like a common practice after a long journey. You take a few days and rest and get your bearings and get ready to go about your business for which you came. Well, then we read that on that 4th day, so after their 3 days of rest, the next day, the 4th day, they proceeded to the temple. They delivered the gold, the silver, and the vessels to Meremoth and his fellow priest Eleazar. Also present to receive the offerings were 2 Levites, Jozabad and Noadiah, and these 4 men supervised the counting and are later mentioned in the book of Nehemiah. So when we get to Nehemiah, we'll encounter these guys again. Now remember, as we said before, there are tons and tons of these precious metals that they have to be weighed. And it's estimated that some people who were proficient at weighing could weigh several talents at a time. But even doing that, this is going to take many, many hours to weigh this great quantity of gold and silver and vessels that they brought with them. The text doesn't come out and say, but it suggests that it was counted in a day. But it must have been a long day, I would think. And the result was that everything was delivered safely, so there's nothing missing there. The returning exiles next offered sacrifices to God. Their return signified the restoration of the covenant relationship with God. The act of sacrifice upon returning to Jerusalem emphasizes the importance of reestablishing worship and obedience to God as a community. It reflects the priority of spiritual renewal and covenant faithfulness. This was what their journey was all about. They were there to reestablish that. Well, we get a list of what was sacrificed. 12 bulls were sacrificed, it says, for all Israel. Here again, God is thinking in terms of the whole nation, and these Jews that were coming are thinking in terms of the whole nation. They're probably mostly made up of men and women from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, because those are the ones that were taken from Judah into the Babylonian captivity. But there, again, as we said, there may have been others that were there with them. But certainly they're recognizing the totality of the nation. 96 rams were sacrificed as a generous offering, pointing to their abundance and possibly representing strength. The lambs represent innocence and purity, and the number 77 suggests a completeness or a perfection. There are 12 male goats that were also offered as a sin offering. And we read about the sin offering back in Leviticus 4:27 through 31.
If anyone common people sins unintentionally in doing any one of the things that by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him, he shall bring for his offering a goat, a female, without blemish, for his sin which he has committed, and he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill the sin offering in the place of burnt priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out all of the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove, as the fat is removed from the peace offerings, and the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven.
So these sin offerings were made to atone for any unintentional sins the people had committed and to purify the people. Well, the exiles also had a civic chore that they had to complete. They delivered a copy of the king's orders or his commission to the governors and local officials of the province beyond the river. It was proof of the king's authorization and support for the exiles' mission. It also informed the local authorities of the budget the king had approved for the work the exiles would perform, because he instructed them to provide that budget, so now they knew how much they had to contribute toward this cause. The governor and the satraps followed the king's orders, and it says that they aided the Jews in their work on the temple and the sacrifices they came to offer. So in the end, the Jewish exiles were successful in bringing the proper worship back to the temple. They successfully arrived there with their families intact, and they delivered all of the gold and silver that they had with them to the temple for the purposes of worship. So to summarize our lesson tonight, we've got a few, I think, main takeaways. First of all, we see that God entrusts treasure to his children, and he expects them to be good stewards. We see this in the New Testament when Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, 17 to 21.
As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. O Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, for by the professing it some have swerved from the faith. Grace be with you.
Well, this touches on some of what we were talking about before, that God has entrusted us with treasure. He addresses the rich people first, so there's a financial aspect to that, but there's also treasure, other spiritual gifts that we've been blessed with, and God calls us to steward them and to use them. Secondly, we see that the hand of God protects us through attacks and trials. God doesn't guarantee that we will escape attacks, but that he will see us through them as we trust in him. And again, we see this in 2 Timothy 4, 16 to 18.
At my first offense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. Oh, sorry. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom, to be the glory forever and ever. Amen.
So we know Paul certainly had many trials and many attacks on him, and yet his testimony there at the end is that God carried him through. That other reference there is wrong. There's no Titus reference. And then the third major takeaway this week is that God is honored by true worship. The exiles were careful to bring the offerings and sacrifices to the temple. The Levites and priests were there to conduct the worship as prescribed. Everything was counted, was transparent, and there was accountability, and they worshiped God in a true way. John, we read this also in John 4, verses 23 and 24.
The hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth.
Okay, so then let's close our time with a couple of application questions. As always, we want to consider what we learned about God and his character tonight. What did we see in these verses tonight?
He's always with us.
Yeah.
God holds us accountable.
Mhm.
You actually have to almost prove, like Ezra counted first and last to show, even though he was sure, there had to be evidence that what he stated is just almost back yourself up to say, yes, it was done right, and therefore we'll prove it.
Yeah, and he does it in front of everybody. He's just trying to be transparent. Yeah.
It was almost like he already knew that we're our sinful nature, so he kind of protected us against it by giving us a prescription on how to execute this plan up front.
Yeah, I mean, what a temptation. I mean, millions of dollars. I mean, who'd miss $100,000 out of that? You know, I mean, they're never gonna know, right? So yeah, huge temptation and dangers from. So I mean, they had to be on guard to be prepared to ward off any attackers too. Yeah.
I think it's always so clear that even as they're praying to God, and God is the one whose hands upon them, God is fulfilling the prophecy and the promise, God is doing all of it, it just does not take away from diligence and wisdom and effort and energy and accountability. It's never fully trusting in the Lord never means, so I sit back and do nothing. If you really trust in the Lord, then you're going to act very obediently and faithfully, and you're going to put in the effort and the work. And that just goes hand in hand with the Bible.
Yeah.
It's exactly that.
Yeah, I like that. It's like I think a lot of people spiritually bypass by saying, Jesus, take the wheel. It's a participant, you have to participate in a disciplined way.
Yeah.
If you're falling out of a plane, you can't really do much else. But often it's not the case that your situation is like falling out of a plane without a parachute. Then all you can do.
A cry of desperation to God is one thing, but that's not the model for how we live each day.
There are faithful options to honor the Lord there, but most of the time we have a lot of options for how we're going to honor the Lord in that situation. Or if you think about it, there's probably a way to get through this in a faithful way. So it's probably rare that you find yourself truly in the metaphorical, falling out of the plane without parachute. In which case, God, he just, catch me, take the wheel, that makes sense. I'm not saying those situations never happen. It just maybe get too quick to give Jesus the wheel to something when he's saying, I'm fulfilling my promise and I'm here, I'm faithful to you. There's some faith to walk out or obedience. I'm here for your part. So you can forget that sometimes.
Well, we touched on this maybe a little bit, but just I'll throw out a related question. How does the story of this journey reflect the journey of believers on their way to the heavenly Jerusalem?
It's kind of the same ideas, I guess. What we're saying is we see God's faithful, he's keeping his promise, fulfilling his word, his hands on them, but it doesn't mean that you don't put one foot in front of the other, get out of bed, brush your teeth, go to work or school, and then be faithful or disciplined about it. It's not the state from that.
And I think it's interesting that they're like, we left the Levites. So like, that's like, where's Pastor Gary? Oops. Like, I mean, it's not without its own folly, but I think it's interesting that he has these pauses.
Yeah.
And then yet still, even through that, like, the mission is accomplished, right? And, you know, and fastidiously.
Yeah, at first you read that and you kind of think, you know, how'd they get so far and didn't have them? But really, I think, you know, Ezra put out the call and explained what the call was about, and he fully expected that, you know, they would show up, and they didn't. So they,
Especially the Levites.
especially, yeah, that was the whole point of what they were doing. So the other thing I think of here is that just as you know, they had these offerings they were bringing, and there was an accounting at the end. I mean, that's going to happen with us too, right? God's given us gifts, and He expects us to use them. And you know, there are parables that Jesus told that make it pretty clear that there's going to be, you know, an accounting for that at the end. That God's going to want to know, you know, what did we do with what He gave us? So, okay, final comments.
Oh, I was thinking about like the gold and silver. If it was like one talent, one piece, one item, think about how heavy someone if they're going to steal like one whole talent, 75 talents or so, you need, it's sometimes hard to even like steal it. I think like this is an analogy where Alan's company, if they left their doors open, they're okay because the machines are like, no, there's so many tons. Who's going to be able to move one out? And literally, if someone actually stole a machine, it's sort of like, that guy's pretty smart, but he has so much more stuff besides a machine that's like so many tons to get out. It's like almost like a plot. Congratulations, you're able to get at something like that heavy out. And it's sort of like a joke, like if they steal it, like, well, that guy's able to get something, like, I mean, like, something that heavy, it did so much of a feat to get something stolen, right? It's like stealing a statue. And it's so hard to move out of a room and they got it out. It's like a heist is so much more impressive than even the fact that they steal, right? That's my joke about, like, if something's that heavy, how did someone, like, if they stole like so many of them, how many people have to go and like, take them all, right?
There was a furniture company, I'm not sure if Steelcase is still up off the freeway, up kind of Tustin off the 55. Anyway, they manufactured office furniture, and so they would buy these big rolls of steel. And you've often seen these big flatbed trucks, and they maybe have like 2 rolls of steel on them. And you think, well, you know, he has already dropped off part of his load, and he's just finishing up his day. Well, no, they load them that way because those rolls are so heavy. That's all that you can get, right? So somebody had the idea they were going to steal one of these rolls, right? And they got like a pickup truck or something. And somehow they were able to loosen the cable and get the thing rolling, and roll on the back of their pickup truck, and whoosh. Oops, we shouldn't have tried that.
So I say, like, someone has to get something that heavy.
Yeah.
You can move something without the proper like rig or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it may not be that that there was a talent like 75 pounds of gold, like
Raw.
It might have been coins, right?
It's a measure of weight.
It's a weight, yeah.
Loose stuff.
Yeah.
There are some
That's why I was
smaller
wondering,
things here.
is it just like raw, or is it already like a furnished thing that already weighs and divides or whatever?
Probably a mixture of stuff.
Yeah.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
Which makes it even harder if there's like I doubt it's like all melted and then
No, I thought
and
they
put it in
put it
the
in
bars
the
like they do
bars,
at the
right.
you know at the Fort Knox or whatever. It was probably loose stuff. In which case, it might have been easier to see if they wanted.
Yeah,
but
there's like articles like
there's-
everything like that, you know, the father.
It's clear that the integrity of the people is demonstrated by the fact that
Yeah.
you know the count was good at both ends. So that I think that's supposed to communicate something about the people as well, their dedication and devotion. Also, Ezra's wisdom that you're saying, Steve. So I think the point is, you know, maybe part of the point is God preserved, you know, his gold and silver, but He did it through the integrity of the people.
Yeah.
They feared the Lord enough to not touch it, to see it as God's. So there's maybe an analogy there. There's some things that you should maybe treasure enough to not just give away easily or something. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing premarital counseling, and of course, part of that you have to talk about the relationship beforehand. Not to be having sex before marriage. That's something that you are trusted with, and ideally you are holding as the Lord's until the right time to do that. So not to be overly detailed about that, but that's, I think, something a person ought to protect, if at all possible, see as a treasure, and be able to hold that to the time when it is delivered to the person you married. Maybe there's an analogy there.